Welcome to Lesson 3 in Quick and Effective Environment Illustration. In this lesson, we're going to start the process, start the workup. We've got our sketch on the other monitor. We've got our reference lined up. We can glance over it when we need to. And we're going to focus on creating this illustration now. We're going to go take it layer by layer, blocking in the background, blocking in the middle ground, blocking in the foreground, keeping our layers labeled, keeping them separate, keeping them easily editable, because that's really key in using Photoshop to do environment work, to do a landscape painting. You can set up your layer, you can carve out the shape, let's say the distant mountain, and you just lock it. You either set up a clipping mask in it or lock the transparency, and then you paint within that layer and you add texture and you add color, and that's the basic technique we're going to use in creating this illustration. And it's something that makes Photoshop stand apart from other media because you can create these masks. So every element can have its own masks. So you never, if you need to change the color of something, you quickly just change the color. You don't need to paint within the lines or worry about the color flowing out into other areas. As long as you keep your layers organized and keep your masks clean, you can edit nearly anything about the image right up to the end. And since that's key in Photoshop, it's one of its main strengths. We're gonna use that in nearly every mark we make. We're gonna use that same idea, that same technique of creating the shape and then editing that shape with color or texture, or even refining the shape more so that it completely reads as the element we want it to. So I've got just a background, and I'm going to start blocking in those clouds. Now I'm switching up brushes a little, for a soft brush for the clouds, a hard brush for the landscape. And at this point, we're not too concerned with edges. We just want to get the shapes down and get them accurately placed. Because once all our shapes are placed accurately, that's something you don't have to worry about later on. You don't have to worry about composition, about an area getting too heavy compositionally or an area feeling too empty, because we've got all this locked down when we block in. So I think we'll come forward with a middle ground, which is our second mountain range. Ideally, you want to keep your layers restricted, especially in the beginning, to foreground, middle ground, background. And then within that foreground, you'll start to break it up, a closer foreground to further back foreground. And the same with the middle ground. You'll go in and break it up, a first middle ground, a second middle ground, maybe even a third middle ground. And as you further subdivide things, then you start detailing and start worrying about color and texture. But until we have every element loosely blocked in, we don't need to worry about any of that stuff yet. Any color, any texture, detail. We just need to block in the main shapes so that when we look at this image from a distance or in thumbnail size, it reads. Now starting to indicate a little character to this shape. this mountain peak there is catching the last light of the day, and in the end is going to be a focal point of this image. So I'll spend a little extra, few extra strokes getting it a bit more refined at this point to keep in my mind that this is the point I always want furthest ahead, this peak. This is a point that's going to set the precedent for the rest of the image. This is the focal point. Ideally, we go from here and we radiate out to the rest of the image. Now setting up that second middle ground. This is more of going to be a wooded landscape, looking slightly down over it, and that's where the real depth is from this foreground all through this middle ground back to that distant mountain range. So as I block this in, I try, it's a line you had to ride of being careful and getting it accurately placed and getting it down and keeping it fresh. So you always got to be careful to not not to get too carried away with detail at this point. But you once you start getting the canvas full, you want to start indicating and slowly refining and bringing the image to life to where you want it to be. Now I'll start laying in the foreground. Using a darker value, same technique, just blocking in. Hard edge brush. This area is going to be full of detail and texture. So right now, I'm just leaving it a dark shape and getting in the main idea of this foreground. These trees coming up out of the shadow here. See, these are pine trees, and it will, I'm using a representative stroke at this point, trying to get a little bit of the character. We've got trunk and the branches that radiate out, and I can imply that as I draw it. So here we have the center trunk, branches come out, branches radiate out from the center, and then smaller branches radiate out from those branches, and that's as far as we get at this point, just getting that texture down. Get all these shapes blocked in, and it's a breeze to work on later, because you can imagine trying to color this tree at the same time I'm trying to block in its silhouette or its outline. You would have to keep working that silhouette over and over and keeping the outline under control while if you're changing the colors and textures while you're creating the object. Where with this approach, we get the shape locked down. I can lock this foreground layer or put a clipping mask above it, put a layer above it, and lock that clipping mask, and then I can paint within that layer. And we have this perfect mask of this tree. Now there's this main tree, which is also a focal point. This area, this area of the branches overlapping this mountain peak in the background is really the focal point of the pic. So I want to get this down right. I make a mark. If it's not right, undo it, and just try again and get it right. That's really one of the most effective things in Photoshop is undo if you use it efficiently. If you make a mistake, if your mark isn't right, you don't want to have to struggle and erase it and try to make it work. Just undo it and make the mark again. Now this tree here is like I said, I'm not gonna get carried away with detailing this yet. I just want to get this indicated. Branches, thicker and thinner branches, the dynamic of the line, the direction, the main shapes. So I'm going to take a look at this tree and we'll finish this lesson up just blocking in this tree. And then once I have all these shapes blocked in, we can move on lesson 4 and we'll start refining those layer shapes in lesson 4.